5 people stayed awake for 15 days straight. When the gas finally stopped, they screamed to be left inside. This is the chilling story of the Russian sleep experiment. Back in 1947, during the peak of the Cold War, a group of Soviet scientists embarked on a secret, horrifying project. They selected 5 political prisoners for an experiment designed to test the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation. The subjects were locked inside a sealed chamber, where they were continuously exposed to a stimulant gas that prevented them from sleeping. They were promised their freedom if they could stay awake for 30 days. For the first 5 days, everything seemed normal. The prisoners talked to each other, sharing stories of their past lives. But as the days wore on, their conversations grew darker. They became paranoid, whispering into the microphones, believing they could earn the scientists' trust by betraying their fellow inmates. The researchers watched, fascinated and disturbed, as the social fabric inside the chamber completely unraveled. On the 9th day, the screaming began. One prisoner ran back and forth across the chamber for hours, screaming until his vocal cords tore. Then, an eerie silence fell. The scientists, worried, checked the microphones. They were working, but there was no sound from inside. The oxygen meters showed consumption, meaning at least one person was still alive, but the chamber was utterly quiet. This deafening silence lasted for 3 days. Finally, on day 15, the scientists decided to intervene. They announced over the intercom that they were opening the chamber and would release one subject. Instead of relief, they were met with a terrifying response. A calm voice replied, "We no longer want to be freed." Panic erupted in the control room. The scientists decided to flush the chamber of the stimulant gas and fill it with fresh air. The moment the gas stopped, the subjects began to scream again. They begged, pleaded for the gas to be turned back on. Soldiers were sent in to retrieve the prisoners, and what they found was a scene from a nightmare. Out lay 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, but they were barely human. They had committed unspeakable acts of self-mutilation. Chunks of flesh were torn from their bodies, their own abdominal organs were exposed, yet they were still alive, walking and talking. They fought against the soldiers with a strength that seemed impossible, begging not to be removed. One of them screamed, "I must remain awake," as he was dragged out. The surviving subjects were taken to a medical facility, but they resisted all attempts to be sedated. They fought with superhuman strength, breaking the bones and tearing the flesh of the soldiers trying to restrain them. When one was finally put under anesthesia, his heart stopped instantly. He died on the operating table. The others, seeing this, became even more frantic. They screamed that if they fell asleep, they would die. The lead scientist, against all medical advice, ordered them to be returned to the chamber with the gas. As the gas began to flow again, the survivors calmed down. Their frenzied screams turned into faint smiles. One of them looked at the researcher and whispered, "So nearly free." The experiment continued, but what happened next remains one of history's most terrifying unanswered questions. Would you volunteer for such an experiment? Thanks for watching.